So I will be doing something in the near future, just kind of put it out there. But we talk about church growth barriers. We talk about attendance barriers, and there is a certain negativity to a barrier. It is this thing that you have to get over instead of an opportunity. I'm going to start changing some of my phraseology in the future to opportunities instead of barriers.
I like that.
I think that that's going to give a brand new message. And so for the listeners and viewers of Revitalize and Replant, we are calling this why 50 to 100 in attendance is the new barrier. But Amy is going to do me a favor and put in parentheses to that, but a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think a barrier is a word that is limiting. It makes us feel like, oh, there's something else I don't have the energy, I don't have the time. I'm not ready to take on that barrier. I think it's a limiting word. It's an off-putting word. Nobody wants to take on a barrier. That's pretty good for an old man like you to come up with. How long you been in this work? It took you that long to figure that out. Is that right?
Did you say something? Yes, you said something. I hear you, Mark.
I'm really impressed. That I've always resisted the idea of, we got the 200 barrier but it is an opportunity. Every time you go through a growth phase, there's opportunity to do something different and move. I like the opportunity. I could embrace that word. I really could.
Well, I will be embracing it in the future because I'm going to take a mentoring group through that. We're going to go through an opportunity.
I like it.
Okay. Sounds like a winner. All right. So why has this opportunity, which used to be a barrier, by the way, why is it taking place at a lower attendance level than we used to? Mark, do you remember who this is a test, and you don't have to get it right, but I'll give you the answer eventually. Do you remember who popularized the 200 barrier? I don't think it's original with him, so it's a man. Do you remember who popularized it?
Well, I'm going to take a shot and say Lyle Schaller, but if not him, Stetzer talks an awful lot about it. But then Stetzer talks a lot about everybody's stuff anyway that's not his. So I figured he'd talk about it. He probably wasn't original with him, but so I don't know if it's not Schaller. Who?
Schaller has certainly talked about these attendance levels. He certainly has, and he has books on everything. He almost hit 100 books before he died. I don't think he quite hit it. I just hit the 40 mark for my book. I am not trying to compete with Schaller because I'll be dead in 2 years or less, and so I'm not going to try to do 60 books.
On the resume I send out to people, I say that I do a podcast with Dr. Rayner, and together he and I have written a total of over 40 books. So, I've written one, you've written 40. So that's a true statement. Together, we've written a total of over 40 books. So,
and together we are strong.
Together we build. Actually, that's another story for another day.
What you did was you pretty much brought a sandwich into this. You brought the older one, the one part of the bread, which is Schaller, and you brought a newer one, although Stetzer is not as new as he used to be, and you brought those two. It's someone in between that, Elmer Towns. As we record this podcast, I think today might be his birthday or a few days before, and he's 90. Wow.
Yep.
And still somewhat of a newlywed.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, he's been married 4 years, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
So his wife died, the incredible marriage, and he said he was getting ready for widowhood, and in his 80s, I think he married again.
Yeah. I tell you, I should have thought of Elmer Towns. That makes all this. You got me on that one. I should have known that. And y'all need to learn if you're a pastor, just read some Lyle Schaller and read some Elmer Towns. Stuff never gets old. The timing, the culture has changed and shifted, but the realities are very much still very, very much there.
Well, here's the reason I am more familiar with it than maybe a lot is there was a season that an organization called Church Growth Institute sent people out to do seminars. Elmer Towns was the leading voice of those. I was one of those. And Mark, this is true. There were some weeks where I would do 5 seminars in a week. I would go from one town and do a morning seminar, I would drive to the next town and do an evening seminar. And so I was doing seminars all over the United States. This was before GPS, and it was, boy, was it a challenge. Elmer was out doing his, Gary McIntosh, Glenn Martin, me, Pete Wagner was in that group as well. I was one of the younger ones in the group, but I learned a lot just from what they were doing.
What a great heritage.
Yes, what an old age as well. So let's get to talking about it. You and I have meandered in our old age enough on this. Let's look at some of the reasons why 50 to 100 may be a new opportunity to go through. First of all, the median-sized church is smaller. It used to be 120, 125, 150, and therefore 200 would be the next place. The median-sized church right now, Mark, is 65.
Yeah, 65. That means half the churches are under 65 in attendance and half are over 65 in attendance. Let me ask you a question, though, because it really is interesting to me. Why do you think it has in our lifetime, gathered worship attendance has dropped so much? Now, there are those few outliers. In our lifetime, we've seen mega churches evolve that weren't around 100 years ago, right? 1920s, you had very few mega churches at all, a handful. Today, someone said to me, I looked it up, that there are more mega churches in Nashville, Tennessee today than there were in all of North America in 1978 when I graduated from high school. That's probably true. So we do have those outliers. We have the big mega churches. But what we don't have anymore are as many of the churches where 200, 250 is the norm. It's almost as if it's mega churches or churches under 100. Can you unpack that for me a little bit?
First of all, a little bit of clarity. The number of mega churches is now declining. So right. even though there are a lot of mega churches that are out there, and sometimes it's even being redefined. It used to be 2,000 in average worship attendance. I recently saw someone who wants mega church to stay around, redefined it at 1,700. You just keep lowering it. And
keep lowering it.
Keep doing it. Here's the way we see it, Mark. The general growth pattern of most churches, not all churches, the general growth pattern of most churches in the 20th century was reaching cultural Christianity. And so therefore, people wanted to claim that they were a Christian.
Yep.
People wanted to say that they went to church, and right. Some of them did. And so our pattern of reaching the world was reaching some lost, some non-Christians, but largely cultural Christians. And during that time when cultural Christianity, or the culture was favorable to Christianity as a whole, that meant that we could have larger churches because we had people who were coming just because it was the cultural thing to do. Cultural Christianity has disappeared. And therefore, that big swath of people that our churches were reaching no longer feel compelled or desiring to come to church.
Yeah.
We think
when I was a kid, my dad pastored in a county seat town. And I was thinking the other day, I couldn't imagine someone that was going to be a principal of a high school or a principal of a junior high school in that county seat town moving to town and not joining somebody's church. It doesn't right. It doesn't mean they were really a Christian, but they were going to join somebody's church because you can't have your high school principal not be a member of a church in the 1960s or 70s. But today, it's almost the opposite. Today, if he joins a church or she joins a church, she's already suspect, perhaps, in some ways. I was thinking about that just the other day, how that has changed for sure.
And that was a large portion of our growth. And it may not have been a school principal. It may not have been a politician or a business person. It may have been someone living in a neighborhood that just wanted to be accepted by others in the neighborhood.
Right.
Oh, where do you go to church? Oh, I'm a member of this church.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah. I would. Yeah. Okay. That's true. I would get with that for sure. And it's just so the cultural headwinds have changed and we're just in a much tougher and more difficult climate. We're in the denomination that I'm in, Southern Baptist, we talk a lot about the loss of baptism, how our baptism numbers are down considerably from the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and all the reasons why, and a lot of finger pointing and that kind of thing. But I think sometimes it's important to just look at the context we're in and say, this is a much harder evangelistic context than it was in 1965, I would think.
Yes.
Billy Graham was packing out 100,000 seat stadiums. He'd pack out Madison Square Garden for 4 or 5 weeks in a row in New York City in the 1960s and those kinds of things. And there was a time there that we're not in right now. And I don't think we got to be careful. We try to compare this day and age to a different day and age. This is the day and age we're in right now.
Cultural Christianity, in some ways, you can put a marker at it at 1949. And I don't want to say that Billy Graham ushered cultural Christianity. That's not what I'm saying. But 1949 was the Los Angeles Crusades, where Billy Graham became well known.
Yeah.
Well known. The editor of the Washington Post, we wouldn't consider the Washington Post this great friendly newspaper to Christianity. The editor of the Washington Post sent a note to all of the reporters that were local reporters, and she said 2 words: Puff Graham.
Right.
In other words, get the word out about Billy Graham.
Right. And some of that, you were very familiar with Billy Graham because you were in your previous life. You've had experiences with him, not your previous life, your current life. I don't mean you lived before.
I am not reincarnated for those who are listening.
I don't know what that means, but you've had experience with him. But part of that, and I've heard that story where they said, promote or pump Graham. Part of that was the Cold War, right? And the fear of Russian and the nuclear bombs that were coming, and we had to protect ourselves. Huh?
It's back. Fear of Russia and nuclear bombs again.
Yeah, we're back to that all over again. But I think that was part of it. And the sense that humanity felt like that at any moment the whole world could come to an end. And so there's this sort of that sense, I think, too, but again, we're back with that with pandemics and nuclear war and that kind of thing. We've really got off topic here, haven't we?
We have, and I'm going to get us back on topic.
I'm not sure anybody's still listening besides Amy, and it looks like she's nodding off. So we better get back.
Why is 60 to 100 the new growth opportunity to get through that? First of all, we need to realize what has taken place in attendance. If you had 60 to 100 people 20 years ago, you may have 150 active members. If you have 60 to 100 in attendance today, you may have 200 to 300 members. And when I say members, these are people that are expecting pastoral care. Even though they don't show up, they expect you to be there for them as their pastor, even though you are there in absentia.
So here's something, guys, and here's something you can do in your church. And I did it at Warnell a few times. The month of October, register everybody who attends a worship service. They asked me, why do you want to do that? Well, I'm just kind of weird. Just do this for me. It's important. So we did. We registered everybody who came to a worship service in the month of October. And then you pick another month in the spring that doesn't have Easter in it because that throws it all off. But, if Easter's in April, then you do it in March. And you do the same thing in that month. And then what you do is you sit down and you look at how many different individuals did we have in worship over a period of a month. And you might have only had 40 or at that time we were like 50 or 65 in worship on any given Sunday. But over a period of a month, we'd have over 100 different individuals who came to worship. And so we had to realize that's 100 different individuals that feel like they're connected to us and we have to give pastoral care to. And I'm not trying to say, hey, we're really running 100, not 60. That's not the point. The point is there's that many people in our sphere of influence that we need to be aware of and care for. And people used to think they were regular in church attendance if they came 3 out of 4 Sundays. When I was a kid, my dad's deacons, he was a pastor, they'd work out their vacation so they'd only miss 1 Sunday. Or they have 2-week vacation and they'd take their family. Today, you and I know if people want to travel and go see somebody and go camping, they do, and they don't think as much about their commitment to the local church. And we should talk about that in another podcast. But the reality is people's understanding of regular church attendance, their understanding of it has changed. Their self-definition of it has changed. If they come once a month, they think they're regular. Would you agree with that?
Actually, there is a technical term now for people who attend an average of once a month. Are you aware of that?
I did not.
Mm-hmm. It's called deacon. Just thought I'd let you know. That's corny. That's almost a old granddad joke. So we're talking about one of the reasons that you may not be above the 65 level. One is it's difficult to give pastoral care to this many people, and so that might be part of it. And so you got to equip the saints to do the work of ministry. That's another topic. We'll probably do that in a upcoming podcast. But that's one of the reasons. Another reason is the berry bucket. We're not going to go through the berry bucket, but the berry bucket is when Well, I will go through it real quickly. You have this fulcrum or the seesaw, and there are two buckets. And on one side of the bucket is those who were at your church before you got there, and the other side is the Newberries, those who came after you got there. And the berry bucket can often be a tension that prevents you from growing any further because they're resisting change of the new people who are coming in. Instead of us going through that, Mark, I'm going to refer everyone to episode number 275, where we did a bit of detail on the berry bucket theory.
That's right. Turn in your hymnals to number 275, and let's stand and sing the berry bucket together, shall we?
Exactly.
No, it is good. And when you brought up the berry bucket in 275, I was impressed. So it's worth your time to go back and listen because it impressed me, and I'm going to use it in different category. When I go out and speak, I'm going to use the berry bucket, but I'm probably going to change it to something other than berries. But it'll be a bucket of something.
Well, you do that. Just remember, Carl George originated the
Carl George. I remember that. All right.
Carl George. And if you don't, people have the same in first, last name really confuse me at times. And I tell this guy that I mentor quite often, his name is Rob Paul. Or is it Paul?
Yes, I know Rob Paul. Yeah.
Rob Paul. Yeah, it's Rob Paul.
Yeah.
I get confused with those. Fortunately, at Lifeway, we had someone who had both a first and last name that could be a first or last name, but it was the same name. It's Terry. His name was Terry Terry.
Really?
So I always got Terry Terry right. Yes, we are going to different.
Well, Clifton could be a first name. I've had people. Sometimes I'll say Clifton, and they'll say just your first or last name. That could be. That's a pretty cool first name, actually. Except it's my last name.
It is. It has an air of distinction about it.
It does.
You may need to change it in the future. Okay, pastoral exhaustion is common today. It always has been common, but pastoral exhaustion is common because of everything that's happening, but because of all the pastoral care that's expected. So sometimes you just cannot go any further because you have to go through this taking care of everyone is hard to take care of others. Did I say that right?
It does. And again, that's another podcast for another day, is how you have to find ways to train up other leaders in your church to help carry the load. The plurality of leaders in a church is critically important. You can't do it all by yourself, on and on and on. And that's absolutely true because you can't give that much pastoral care. People's lives are really challenging, and people's lives have always been challenging. That's not new today. That's nothing new at all. But marriages are in difficulty. People are having trouble with their children, all the strong cultural headwinds, the questions about sexuality and all those kinds of things you have to unpack and deal with kids and parents and all those issues and we're dealing with. So there's so much that just takes up your pastoral care, and you can only do so many people. So if you don't create ways to share that load, you are going to put a limit on how many people you can really effectively shepherd, for sure. Well
stated. The last point that we want to make on these barriers is evangelism is necessary to get past any type of barrier or to go to new opportunity. Let me give you some of our latest research, Mark. This is for those who are wondering how we do this particular research at Church Answers. It's qualitative, not quantitative. It's not a big survey. It's where we're actually going and interviewing different ones and going a little bit deeper. But in the churches that we have looked at thus far, 5% of churches only 5% of churches have any type of evangelism emphasis in a year. Anything. 5%. Only 5%. Fewer than 1% have an ongoing evangelism emphasis where you're doing something once a month. So those are pretty dramatic numbers right there.
Yeah, it's a wonder we have a church at all, isn't it?
It is. Fewer than 5% do anything, and fewer than 1% have some type of ongoing evangelism.
Yeah.
So that is one of the reasons that we at Church Answers, I know the North American Mission Board, we are really getting back to the basics of, are we doing evangelism? We're reaching people with the gospel.
Right. And we have to understand evangelism in a context of again, where we don't have home court advantage anymore. And
that's right.
That's a different evangelism context than maybe we grew up with. So we ought to do a podcast on that just to change in that context. But
context for evangelism.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like
Yeah, because it's changed so much in the last 10 to 15 years, and we don't know quite how to the gospel still changes lives. It doesn't matter the context. It's changed lives all around the globe. But how do we present that? How do we deal with that in the new context? And also going back, so the guys people have tuned into this because we talked about the 50 and 75 and 100. The reason those become opportunities, or as we say, barriers, is because if you don't create another group of leaders, you're going to be limited in how many people you can really pastor and care for. And so you have to spend some of your time, a good bit of your time actually, developing some leaders. And again, there's another podcast. They don't, oh man, I want to be careful because people listen to this, but I've had some experiences lately with some churches I've consulted with where pastors have been there 20 or 30 years and they're doing everything themselves still. And I'll point it out, and they'll say, our numbers are down. We're really struggling through COVID. Well, yeah, because I say, where are your deacons? I've got some churches where they don't have any deacons. And the guy will say, well, there's nobody here qualified to be a deacon. And I was like, I just don't believe that. I believe the Lord builds his church, and there are men there qualified to be deacons. You're just not mentoring them and discipling them and spending enough time with them to get them to the place where they can actually serve as deacons or serve as elders, even in a small church. And so sometimes guys just look around and say, well, there's nobody here qualified, so I have to do it by myself. No, you've got to get some people qualified, or you're never going to get past that 50 or 60. And you know me well enough to know I'm not a big fan of saying you got to get to 200, right? Paul never asked Timothy, have you broke the 200 barrier? I don't care about that. But I do care about reaching people. And I do care about healthy church leadership. And you have to create a broader base if you're going to make it through those opportunities of growth. If you don't, you're going to stifle yourself. That's a line from All in the Family. Stifle yourself, Edith. So I was trying to work the word stifle into a podcast, and I did it. So I'm real proud of myself.
And you worked All in the Family with Edith and Archie. Good gravy train. Amazing. Well, if you've listened to the different points of why 50 to 100 is the new barrier, or as we're now saying, opportunity, you've heard two recurring themes. One, we have to reach beyond ourselves, evangelism, even in a culture that is not receptive. And two, you have to equip the saints. And that means if you don't have equipped saints, start equipping one person. Start working with one. Good stuff, Mark. Good, all kind of good information here. Once again, thanks for being a part of Revitalize and Replant. And just come back, and we're going to keep talking about these things that we think can help your church get healthy, even in some challenging times. We'll see you in the next episode.